Hi golfers, Nick here from GOLFTEC Singapore. It's Friday, so welcome to another lesson on golf tips. This week on golf tips, we're going to talk about the 3 key fundamentals of playing good golf. Then we're going to focus on the number 1 fundamental and give you guys a little bit of an idea on what controls that and how to improve your golf. So first of all, 3 key fundamentals. These are all the fundamentals that the best players in the world have every time they turn up to the tour events. So when you see the best players in the world, they all have different types of swings, but what they're all able to do, first of all, is make good contact. So when I say good contact, it means their low point of their golf swing is in front of the ball. When I look at golfers that I coach here at GOLFTEC, the biggest issue is generally the low point of the swing. So their club is not coming down and hitting the ball first. It's usually hitting the ground behind the ball or catching it thin. So that's the first thing you need to be able to control, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. But just to give you guys a little bit more of an idea on the other 2 key fundamentals, the second one is power. So the best players in the world are all able to reach the holes in regulation. So for example, they can reach every par 4 in 2 shots. The third fundamental is probably the hardest, and it's probably the one that a lot of amateur golfers probably focus too much on. A lot of golfers are trying to hit the ball straight when even the best players of the world don't do that. First of all, no one hits the ball dead straight, everyone curves the golf ball. Second point to note is the best players in the world, on a good day, they're probably only hitting 70% of fairways and greens. And that's because to try and control the club face at, say, 100 miles an hour, 2 or 3 degrees out, can miss the fairway or miss the green. So to try and control direction is a little bit unrealistic for a lot of high handicappers. So for you to improve your golf, if you can hit the ball further and make better contact, you're going to improve. So what we're going to talk about today is the contact. So there's 3 things that control the low point of the swing. One is where the weight is, and we measure that from the head and the hips. Second one is where the hands are, so how much shaft lean you have, and the third one is the swing direction. So we're going to briefly go through those now, and then we're going to take a look at some data, and we're going to have a look at the video. So I mentioned there's 3 things that control the contact and the low point of the golf swing. The first one is where the weight is. So if you take a look at the screen, we measure the weight by 2 centres. The centre of shoulders, so the head, and the centre of the hips. So if you take a look at the screen, what you'll see is my head's in that box and my trail hip is on that line. Now for whatever reason, if I was to move both those centres back, the head and my hips swaying away from the target, like so, I could potentially hit the furthest behind the golf ball. If you take a look at the best golfers, what they tend to do is they'll stay centred inside the box. Their hip will actually turn inside of this line here. So the way they turn, they're turning around their left leg, and then from there, the lower body weight's going to move forward and the head's going to stay in the box until impact. So that's what we're looking to try and create. We're trying to keep the head steady in the box until after impact, and we're actually trying to turn or pivot the hips around the left leg and then move it forward in the downswing. So that's the correct movement. Now, if you move it incorrectly and move both those centres back, you can potentially hit behind the golf ball. So let's give it a go. Let's move both those centres back, see what happens. Okay, so you saw the shot on the screen there, just slightly to the left. Tried to move both those centres back, so let's take a look at the data quickly. Data there for that shot where I moved my weight to the right and didn't quite get it back at impact. I actually hit 8.6 degrees up on the ball. And when you look at the best players, they're hitting 4 degrees down. Now we're going to talk about the second factor that controls the low point. So we've discussed the weight. So the golfer coming through could have the weight on the left, head in the box. However, the club could still hit behind the golf ball. And that's because the next thing that controls the low point is what the hands or the wrists do as they move into the impact area. So if you look at the best golfers, not only do they have the weight on the left, they also have forward shaft lean. So I could have all my weight there, but if I let that club go for whatever reason, I'm going to hit behind. So technically what happens, once the shaft and the left arm line up into a straight line, effectively that's where the club is the furthest point away from your shoulder. That's the point where the club should be in the ground, which should be after the ball. So at impact, the hand should be slightly ahead, and then lines up just after low point, roughly about there on the left shoulder. That's where there should be a straight line. What I tend to see is golfers, as they come down, they unhinge the wrist too early. Now that shaft has passed the left arm, the club's reached its longest point. So what tends to happen then, either 2 things are going to happen. Either one, that person is going to carry on the club into the ground and hit behind it, or they're going to start flexing the arms and catch the ball thin on the way up. So it's very important controlling the low point, not only to where the weight is, but also where the hands are. So we're going to hit a shot here. I'm going to have my weight on the left all the way through the swing, but I'm going to let the club pass my hands, see what happens to the contact. So as you saw there on the video, you saw how I had my hip forward, my head in the box, but as I came through I let the hands release too early, I hit behind the golf ball. So let's take a look at that data now. 2.8 degrees upwards. So just having the weight on the front leg is not good enough. You need to make sure you have that shaft lean. However, there's one more factor that does control the low point. The third factor that controls the low point is the swing direction. So I'm going to use this noodle here to discuss what I mean by the swing direction, how that affects the contact on the ground. So I've got my noodle here just to help explain a little bit about the swing direction, how that affects the low point. So you can see the pen mark in here, it's in line with the golf ball, and this noodle is pointing straight down the target line square to this mat. Now if I move the swing direction out to the right, you'll see how the pen lifts off the ground, and now the part of the noodle behind the pen is now touching the ground. So effectively, when I move my swing direction out to the right, my swing arc hits behind the golf ball, and vice versa. So set up in the middle, if I move my swing direction to the left, what you'll start to see is now the front part of the noodle is actually touching the mat. So that's how the swing direction can affect the sort of the low point of the golf swing. So we just discussed the swing direction using the noodle there. So if I put that into practice, if I set up on this mat, now I have my hands forward, I have my weight forward, if I just swing now out to the right, change my swing direction, swing a lot more from the inside, I'm hitting a good 4 or 5 inches behind this ball. Now, same technique in terms of where the weight is and where my hands are. Now I'm going to swing more across the ball. Now I'm hitting further forward on the ground. So let's test one. Let's try and move my swing direction as much to the right as possible, yet try and keep my hands forward and try and keep my weight forward. Okay, not bad. Nice little draw. Let's take a look at that data. So just looking at the third factor there and looking at the data, I moved my swing direction more out to the right as much as I could, and I still hit up on the ball 6 degrees. So let's sit down now and take a look at those 3 factors in a bit more detail and give you guys a drill to go home and work on. So the first factor that affected the low point was where the weight was. So I was trying to move my head out of the box and try and shift my weight to the right as much as possible, and then hit through, still make a decent sort of contact. So looking at the data, first of all, path was pretty good 4 degrees into out, but the angle tack was 8.5 degrees upwards, which massively affects the low point. So let's have a look at the swing in a bit of detail here. So just taking a look at the face-on view here, you can see how the head moves out the box to the right, all the way out the box, and the weight moves outside of that line. So this was the 2 things I said that shouldn't happen. We should sort of turn inside that line and the head should stay in the box in the swing. Look at where it is at impact. So as we come into impact here, you can see the head is basically completely outside of the box. The weight or the right hip is sort of back into the same position, but you'd expect that to be further forward at impact by this point. What is interesting is the sort of straight line formed between my arm and the shaft pretty much is there. So even though I've got some sort of degree of shaft lean, my head is behind that box, my weight's not far enough forward, that's why I hit up on that golf ball. So moving on to the second swing, the second factor that affected the low point was what the hands did. So you could have your weight forward, you have your head in the box, but you could still hit behind the golf ball because of the way you delivered your hand. So looking at the data, you can see path was okay, 1.5 degrees into out, not as much as the previous shot, and I hit roughly 3 degrees upwards. So let's take a look at the swing. And moving up to the top of the backswing, you can see the head stays in the box nicely, and the hip doesn't sway outside that line. Now moving down into impact, you can start to see the weight starting to move forward, the head in the box. However, by the time I hit the golf ball, the club has overtaken my lead arm. So if I drew a line down my lead arm, it's already overtaken it at this point. So this is roughly where the club would reach its longest point in the ground. So you can pretty much see here, I think the club's pretty much in the ground at this point. So this is where the club hits the ground. To avoid the ground, a lot of players do flex the arms, and you can see I really sort of scooped it as I went through. So even though my head's pretty much in the box, I've actually moved some weight through. My hands have caused the club to hit behind the golf ball by making that club longer too early. Okay, so the third thing affected the low point was the swing direction. Now, looking at the data first of all, my swing path moved 16 degrees from in to out, and the angle of attack was 6 degrees upwards. However, if you look at the swing, if you look at the face-on view first of all, see how the head stays in the box. I'm actually keeping my weight on the left inside, move my weight forward, by the time I hit the golf ball, I've pretty much got a straight line here, my head's in the box. So from this angle you'd say good shot or good swing. However, when you look at down the line view, now if you look at this view on the left here, you'll see how my club is way in behind my hands here, and then the club tracks quite an inside angle into the golf ball, and that's one of the reasons why my club is hitting behind the ball. We showed you there with the noodle, the swing direction, moving it further out, too much out to the right can cause you to hit behind the golf ball. So just to finish up here, I'm just going to show you guys a drill just to go and work on, just to try and improve your low point. So you probably need like a 9-iron for this. So set up, we talked about the three things, so where the weight is, where the hands are, and the swing direction. So I want you to set up, try and have a little bit more weight on the left side and try and maintain that weight there. So as you swing back, you're not shifting the hips and you're not moving the head. So weight on the left, try and keep the weight there, try and pivot on that left side and move your left shoulder down to stop you from moving to the right. So weight left, left shoulder down, keep the hands forward and then exit on the left hand side along these sort of grid lines. So I'm just going to hit a little swing here, and the best thing to do is to break it all down. If you're struggling with low point, break it down to short swings and try and build it up. So let's hit a shot. So weight left, hands forward, shoulder down, and pivot on the left side. Just punch this through. So pretty good strike there. So you saw my swing there with the 9-iron. It just exaggerated that a little bit. Still went out to over 140 yards. My angle attack was 8 degrees down. So we're going to sit down now and take a look at my swing in a bit more detail and see why that low point was in front of the golf ball. Okay, so just see me hit that drill there with the 9-iron. So just to look at the data first of all, path was sort of 4 degrees from in to out, which is pretty much my average. However, the angle attack was slightly more downwards, more than normal. Probably because I was trying to exaggerate these movements. We talked about how important it is to have the sort of the weight on the left, move the left shoulder down to stop moving outside of those boxes, like we talked about with the weight. Then I tried to keep my hands as far forward as possible, and then obviously try and get the right exit in the swing direction, which we're going to look at in a second from the down line view. But first of all, we're going to focus on sort of the face-on view to start with. So I've boxed the head, I've got the line on the hip here, and now as I went back, you'll see how actually my head does move a tiny bit towards the target here. So that would be preferable. If you're moving the other way, that's a lot worse. So this is one of the reasons why this swing's a little bit steep, but I was trying to exaggerate this just for this drill, and I think with a lot of players, when you're trying to change things, you do have to exaggerate it. So for the players that are moving out the box to the right away from the target, you probably want to feel like you're moving slightly in towards the target. So you can see the head just moves slightly towards, you can see some sort of daylight between my right hip and the line as I swing back, so I'm keeping weight there. Now another key point here is probably the angle I create in my wrist. So if you look at when my left arm is parallel, if you look at this angle, sort of roughly 60-degree angle between my lead arm and the shaft, that's really important. I'm creating some lag here, and this is one of the reasons it's going to help me with the shaft lean. So I just wanted to point that out. I've talked about this in other videos. So moving down into impact now, what you'll start to see is by the time I sort of get into the golf ball here, my head is a little bit forward where it started, my weight's certainly forward, and there's a straight line formed here by my left arm and the shaft. So looking at the face-on view, I can see I'm going to hit forward on the ground. Let's take a look at the down the line view here as well. So if you look on the down the line, what you'll start to see is how my golf club here is starting to exit this way, and my hands are starting to exit this way as they come through. So you can see as I come through, my hands have exit below my shoulder here. That's really important. So I'm swinging round on the arc, I'm staying on those grid lines. So when you're working on these drills, this was only sort of like a 3/4 swing with a lot of wrist bend. I normally swing a bit further back than that, and then I just sort of punched it through. So just to recap there, so when you're working on your golf swing, first of all, find out where the low point is. You can do that on the grass by putting a line down, or you can do it on the mat, just seeing where the club hits the ground, or get someone to watch you do it. That's the first thing you need to be able to work out, where your club is hitting the ground. Then you need to be able to work out which one of those factors it is. And a lot of the time, it can be a combination of one or two of them, and in some cases, all three. But if you work on that drill, keep the weight on the left, keep the hands forward, move the shoulder down, and just sort of punch balls, you'll start to move that low point forward, start to hit the golf ball a lot better. So golfers, if you've got any questions on that, post them in the box below. If you don't already, please follow me on my other social media platforms, and we'll see you again next week for another video on golf tips. As we go through, we want to try and keep the hands forward, the weight on the left,